Hello, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Hello. We're so glad you're all here. We're just gonna wait a few minutes for more people to join and for Deepa to join, of course. In the meantime, my name is Catherine Foley, and I'm with the Building Movement Project. And if you want to drop into the chat where you're joining from, if there's snow near you, if you're, making it through the snowstorms, feel free to share that. Hello. For those of you that are joining, we're just waiting for Deepa and for more people to join. Hello. Hello.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes. Can you see me okay?
Yes, everything is good.
Okay.
I'm just saying hello. We have almost 20 people here.
Good.
Might want to give it a little bit longer.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. So glad to see you. Would love to know, I think, Catherine, you were saying, would love to know where folks are joining us from.
Yeah. How's the snow near you? Has it started yet?
There's something falling that seems like a mixture of sleet and snow. And I think, we just want to send out positive energy to folks, especially throughout the South, that are facing the brunt of this. And our own BMP's own Anna Castro, who's in Austin, Texas. So just sending out a lot of positive energy to everyone who is struggling through this time.
Yeah. Poor Anna. Jeez. I think I'm going to go ahead and get started if that's okay with you. So as I mentioned, my name is Catherine Foley. I'm with BMP. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm based in Queens. Is there a weird feedback, Deepa? It's okay.
A little bit, but it's fine.
Okay. Also on the topic of snow, if we lose power or connection, just keep an eye out. We'll share more information on Instagram. And we mentioned share where you're joining from. Please feel free to share your role. And we encourage you to ask questions throughout. We'll have a Q&A session towards the end. And finally, you can find the map and all the additional resources on our website. It's linked in our bio, and it's www.buildingmovement.org. So what are we doing today? We're kicking off our new series, 10 Social Change Rules Explained. And many of you are already familiar with the map. And in that same vein, a lot of people have been asking specific questions related to each role. So we figured we'd do a deep dive into each one over the course of the year. So every month we'll be spotlighting one of the roles from the social change map. And today we'll be focusing on disruptors. So what are their strengths? Where can they grow? Who do they work well with? And some more information as well. And with that, I'll welcome Deepa. Hello.
Hey, Catherine, thank you so much. And thanks for everyone who's coming in and joining in space. We had sent out some positive energy to folks around the South who are struggling right now in the US. I see folks joining from around the country, including other parts of the world. So you're so welcome. Thank you for joining us. And before we get started, we're going to make this a Q&A, but we want you all to also please put in, as Catherine said, any questions you have. We'll take them throughout the course of our conversation. But I wanted to first thank you, Catherine, for being in conversation with me and for helping put this together. And also want to thank Kitty Hugh, who also has been so instrumental in making this series happen. It wouldn't have happened without Catherine and Kitty, who are builders and weavers and experimenters. So thank you to the two of you and to everyone at BMP.
Of course. So before we dive into the disruptors, can you just tell us a little bit about the social change ecosystem framework and some of its components?
Yes, I love seeing folks I know join. Yay. Yes, I can. And what I will start with is just saying that the social change ecosystem framework has three components to it. And if you've seen the ecosystem framework, and we just put up the link to the map so you can take a look at it. The first component is the values that we align with. So we say words like solidarity and justice, but really an invitation to you to define what those mean to you in the context of what you're doing. The second part of this framework is the roles, the map of the 10 social change roles, which are not jobs, but the ways in which we show up. And then finally, there is this entire recognition that we are part of an ecosystem, that we don't have to play all those roles all the time, that there are others in our ecosystem that we want to lean on. And three other points I'll quickly mention is that this entire framework is about systemic change. Obviously, there's individual change that will come out of understanding what our roles are and the self-awareness, but it is also about creating systems change in terms of policies, laws, institutions, and systems around us. The second part I'll say is that individuals are using this ecosystem framework, but so can organizations. So an organization can actually also map itself as to what role does it play in a coalition or a network or a task force and the like. And then the last piece I'll say is that, and I'm kind of repping Grace Lee Boggs in my NAPOF shirt today. NAPOF is the National APA Women's Forum. And Grace Lee Boggs is someone who has said that it's all about critical connections, not critical mass, but critical connections. So thinking about the relationship building is a big part that underlies this entire framework.
Thanks so much, Deepa. That really helps to ground the conversation as we move to disruptors. So can you tell us some of the characteristics of what makes a disruptor?
Yes, I can. So disruptors are really important in our social change ecosystems because they are the ones that really speak truth to power, and they can trigger broad institutional and systemic change. And oftentimes they're doing this by taking a lot of risks as well. So if you were to look up the word disrupt in a dictionary, you would find some, connotations that are not so positive, right? So it would be words like interrupt, disorder, rupture. And the concept of disruption oftentimes brings out a negative reaction because generally people get uncomfortable when the status quo is shaken up. But that's really what disruptors do. They are comfortable with that level of discomfort. They are also people with tremendous conviction. They have to be, right? They have to really believe in a deep vision in order to actually take actions that are seen as disruptive or disorderly. They're also able to shake up the status quo in order to get the attention of those who hold power. So many times they're very creative thinkers and strategists. They know who the targets of power are, and they come up with these different innovative strategies and tactics to get the attention of power makers to obviously then create some change. And then lastly, as I said, they are okay with taking risks, at times leading to consequences in their own lives. So they're a really critical role to have in any ecosystem because they are people with tremendous conviction. They are people who are okay with discomfort, and they're people who are really creative in terms of speaking truth to power to create change. And as Preeti's saying, discomfort can energize change, absolutely. So they're okay with taking those kinds of risks.
Right. And so many of us probably know disruptors or personally or like in the political landscape. So can you give us any examples of who disruptors are?
Yes, absolutely. And you're right, Catherine. I mean, a lot of disruptors we tend to see publicly and visibly because they do take those roles, right? They're behind the bullhorn, they are in front of the rally, but they're also disruptors who do quiet disruption work too. And I'll talk about that. So I often think about what Congressman John Lewis would say as the importance of getting into good trouble. And I think that defines really what disruptors can be. And Representative Lewis himself was a disruptor, right? He was one of the young people who was at the helm of the march from Selma to Montgomery in 1965 to advocate for voting rights. And we're actually coming up on the anniversary of Selma again in March. So it's important to think about his role in that way. Other disruptors include people like Ju Hong, who is a young Asian American undocumented immigrant. And you folks might remember that, Ju actually interrupted a speech that President Obama was making, where Ju was in the background with a lot of other people. And he interrupted that speech and said to the president, please stop separating and deporting our families, right? And that type of pressure was really important. He was called a heckler, right? He was not perceived to be someone who did something in the quote right way, right? Going back again, the disruptors take advantage sometimes of these movement moments to make some sort of risky choice. But what Ju did was he really added to the pressure that immigrant youth around the country were already bringing to the administration to say the administration can actually take executive action to expand benefits for immigrants. And so Ju's ability to highlight his own family's experiences in that way was really compelling. It got covered by a lot of media outlets. And I would say it's one of the reasons that we ended up getting those expansive executive orders, not just DACA, which had happened before, but also DAPA. I also often talk about Naomi Osaka as being a disruptor. She's back in the news now with the Australian Open, I believe. But last year, you might remember that she came into the US Open wearing a face mask with the name of a Black person who had been killed in either vigilante or police violence, right? And she did this in a way because of the uprisings that were already happening in the country last summer. But she also was trying to shake up the status quo of tennis, and sports generally, which sometimes doesn't seem to see its connection to social change. And so Naomi Osaka is someone who we can see as being a disruptor, but quietly by using, again, an innovative technique to bring attention to what millions of Americans watching the US Open should be concerned with. A couple more examples, if that's okay. And I would love to hear in the chat if others have examples, because you likely know, as Catherine said, disruptors. You might be one. So if you want to share anything that you've done in that role, feel free. The Indian farmers and the protests that we're seeing right now are disruptors. They're shaking up the Indian government's policies. They are drawing the attention of the entire world, right? And we're all watching now how India is going to respond to the plight of farmers who are risking everything to their livelihoods and their lives, really, to be part of these protests. So disruptors are everywhere around us. These public disruptors I've talked about, but they also include, the college students who are doing sit-ins for ethnic studies classes, or the person at a staff meeting at a powerful company who asks a pointed question about how is this company dealing with anti-racism, right? What is our commitment? So there are lots of different ways in which people can perform the role of a disruptor, both in public and in private, in order to create the change and push for the change that they want to see.
Thanks so much, Deepa. People are really appreciating all these real life examples as well. So we've got Representative Don Lewis, Indian Farmers Movement, Naomi Osaka, and then individuals, people who do this every day in small ways. For people who want to kind of step into the disruptor role more, where's there room to grow?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I think that all of us have areas for growth, right? No matter what roles we play. And this is the part of that self-awareness that I had mentioned earlier. I think one thing is to really be strategic and thoughtful about long-term change. A lot of times disruptors are often mobilizing around a short-term movement moment or a public hook that draws the attention of a lot of people. And so it's important to really, if you can, as a disruptor, think about what is the long-term impact, or how can I work with other people in my ecosystem to redouble what I've been doing, right? So that we see long-term impact for a greater number of people over the course of time. So that's one. I think the second piece is, and this is the case with all social change roles, right? It's about sustainability and finding some level of fulfillment in what you do. So it's really important for disruptors to think about how their actions are actually taking a toll on them. How does it affect you emotionally, spiritually, physically, psychically? But if you are taking the role of a disruptor on time and time again, right? So what's the toll of continually speaking truth to power? How are you taking time to reflect and learn what can change the next time around, right? So really building that time in. I would say that right now, I think, many of us were disruptors over the last 4 years with the Trump administration, right? When you think about the walls and bans and raids and all of those hostile policies that were kind of put upon BIPOC communities.
Mhm.
So I think many disruptors are wondering, is there another role for us right now? Particularly as we kind of rest a bit, right? And think about how we do some repair before we get back into whatever campaigns or fights we're part of.
Thanks. And we kind of talked about this already, but how do you think disruptors are perceived and treated by others?
Yeah. And folks in the chat or who are joining us, please feel free to also add either, ways in which if you are a disruptor, how do you sustain yourself? That would be great to know. Or if there are ways in which you are disrupting right now, right? If you're part of a campaign that the rest of us should know about, or any sort of struggle on your campus or anywhere else, please let us know so that we're clear about that. So I would say that, as I mentioned earlier, disruptors are often seen as people that could be creating inconvenience or disorder, right? And sometimes the public is really unforgiving with disruptors. I've heard people say things like, why are Black Lives Matter protesters, stopping traffic, right? While I'm trying to get to work, right? So this feeling of my privilege and my comfort is being disturbed by what these folks are doing. Or if I'm a person with power, I might think about how to work around a disruptor or to even stymie their actions in some way. So that's why it's really important for disruptors to think about creative strategies, long-term impact, and even finding some allies and supporters who can buttress what they're doing, right? So that they're not on their own. That's why this ecosystem is so important, especially for people like disruptors who are taking risks. I also wanted to point out that, many disruptors who are from BIPOC communities actually are facing greater risks, right? So, we've heard, for example, if a Black woman speaks up about something at her workplace, she's often branded as angry or bitter, right? And that might not be the case if, say, someone who is a white male is actually speaking up, right? He might be seen as, oh, offering a great idea. So I think we also have to think about how our perceptions of BIPOC communities can really shape how we think about disruptors and their energy and their activity. And I also want to note that organizations can also play the role of a disruptor. So as part of a coalition, you might have grassroots organizations that are playing the role of a disruptor to make sure that national groups are not just upholding the status quo, right? And again, it might be happening behind the scenes. A lot of it does. A lot of these interventions that disruptors do happen behind the scenes. They don't always have to be public. But they are really, I see them as interventions that can make a change in terms of how people in power or decision makers are moving through policy systems and the like.
Great, thanks, Deepa. And you took it back to the framework again to mention how all the roles can work together to support one another. And Lizzie, you may have seen in the chat, asked, how can we support disruptors? And I think that kind of ties well into the next question of like, who do they work well with and why?
Yeah, so I'll get to both of those. So disruptors work especially well with visionaries and experimenters. And as I mentioned earlier, disruptors are people with tremendous conviction. They really believe in this cause, right, that they're a part of. And so working alongside visionaries is often helpful for disruptors or people who are starting to be disruptors because they can actually lean into that vision. So the visionary is someone who sees the North Star. This is where we're headed. This is our boldest aspiration. And it is possible, not like years and years down the line, but it can be possible in our present, right? Those are the visionaries. And so disruptors in coordination with visionaries can really make sure that they keep their center very grounded because they know why they're doing it. Because you have to, as a disruptor, oftentimes I've asked myself when I have played that role, why am I doing this? You have to really care about it. You have to be able to articulate it. Experimenters are also really great partners for disruptors, because experimenters are folks who are ready to come up with innovative solutions and strategies. So a disruptor can really partner and brainstorm ideas with them. And then you said, someone said, how can you support a disruptor, right? So I think that if you notice that there are disruptors in your ecosystem, if you are someone who plays the role of a caregiver, you can be extremely supportive to a disruptor. So that means perhaps checking in with someone who's playing a disruptor role. So if someone is organizing, say, a series of rallies, it's as a disruptor, it's important for caregivers to just check in. How are you doing? What do you need? How can I support you? Have you eaten today? Right? Do you need to take a break? Can we go for a walk? So any of those kinds of supports that allow the disruptor to pull back and to recenter and to even not think about what they're kind of working on can be useful. I think disruptors can also be supported by healers who are tending to sort of the broader traumas, the collective trauma, right? So disruptors can really actually strengthen themselves if they have healers in their midst who are thinking about, how does ancestral healing help? How does spiritual healing support? So having caregivers and healers can be very supportive for disruptors.
Right. And I think, like you mentioned, the support will vary based on the action that, a disruptor is taking, whether if it's in the boardroom and someone needs like verbal support, or if someone needs like a ride to a protest. It can show up in many ways.
Those are excellent examples. Yeah.
Thanks. And finally, what are some reflections that disruptors can keep in mind? Or should?
They should keep in mind. Yeah. So I think that for disruptors, one, just, starting from what we just talked about, who's in your ecosystem, right? So as you're mapping out your ecosystem as it connects to like a campaign or a cause or whatever intervention you're making, as Catherine said, like in the boardroom or on the streets, thinking about who else is present for you and making sure that you definitely got, a caregiver, that you're connected to a visionary, that you're connected to perhaps a storyteller who can take what you're doing and make it into a medium that others can learn about, right? So it's really important to have a diverse ecosystem. I think that disruptors who only have disruptors in their ecosystem, that might be really tough, right? If that's like the only folks you talk to all the time, that is not necessarily going to provide the self-awareness you need or the space that you need to kind of reset. The other question would be like, how do you think about strategy in the long run? And that's where working with experimenters or builders can be helpful, to take like an immediate, like really intense intervention, right? And make it last in the long run, and also get more people involved, because not everybody will want to be a disruptor like you. So how do you engage others? Another question is, how do you reset? How do you reflect? What is your practice to sustain yourself? And then finally, do you need to shift into a different role from time to time? Being a disruptor throughout the course of your social change work might not be healthy throughout the course of it, right? And I, like for me, for example, I played that role particularly in the aftermath of 9/11, and I figured out after like 8 years of doing that it was taking a toll on me in many ways, and that I needed to step back. And so thinking about, maybe being a guide to other disruptors, which is something I've been trying to move into more, right? Can be a great way of still being connected to that adrenaline of being a disruptor, because it is very vibrant and it feels very alive. So you can still connect to that, but you're doing it in a way that uses your wisdom and discernment and experience to guide others down that path. So those are some reflection questions that folks can be thinking about. And please put questions in the chat if you have any.
Yeah, I think we're kind of at the end of our, the questions that we had in mind to cover. So if anyone has any questions, any comments, please feel free to share them. We'll also we play different roles in our social justice journey. Yeah. And What was I going to say? We're going to share some of these materials out afterwards. We'll share all the reflection questions and strengths and growth areas afterwards.
I like this comment from Healing Hype Girl. I've heard the saying, observe, don't absorb. And I can see how this can help a disruptor hold their energy. I love that. I think that's so good. You know, one of the things you're reminding me of with that comment is the importance for disruptors to develop the capacity to absorb critique, right? Because they are often critiqued. And so the ability to, as you say, observe it, recognize it, acknowledge it, but don't like bring it in so that it kind of chips away at your own energy is a really, really important way to sustain yourself. So thank you for mentioning that. That's really helpful.
Yeah, we've got a couple more questions coming in from the chat. I think we touched on this earlier, but the difference between quiet and loud disruptors.
Yeah, I like the way that you frame that also. Yeah, so, you know, I think that both quiet and loud disruptors are taking risks when they make whatever intervention they're making, right? And so it's important to recognize that even those who are quietly doing it, and so quietly doing it might mean posing a series of questions to people in power at the organization they work at, whether it's a government agency or it's a philanthropic organization or any other workplace or a company, right? And asking some questions that might take a toll on them, because oftentimes as disruptors, people are not in a position of power. They're trying to impact power or change power, right? And so thinking about so it's important to know that even quiet disruptors need support and that they are taking a risk in some way. And we've talked a lot about kind of quote visible, or as you say, loud disruptors whom we see more publicly and the types of support that they need. But at the end of the day, both are taking risks, both are speaking truth to power, and both are in need of support, right? And also thinking about a strategy that is long-term. And I often say for disruptors, thinking about having a tiered way to escalate so that you're not going to the very top level of escalation, but you're actually finding, again, these strategic ways of shifting power, because sometimes that's what power needs. It needs to be talked to in more of a strategic way in order to transform, right?
That's great. And there are a lot of questions coming in that are kind of, you know, centered around this idea of how do you build out your ecosystem? Like, where do you look for people that can like complement your role, or when you're looking for a role to help support you, how can you build out your ecosystem?
Yeah, I'll take a couple of these. So how do you find healers and caregivers? And then this other question around how do I cope with being a disruptor if people on the team aren't supportive of that? So for the latter, how do I take on the role of a disruptor if there's not much support for doing that, right? I think this is that question of the strategy. So maybe you're in an environment where going to level, you know, Z, the highest level, is not a good idea to do first. And so you have to really think about how do you speak to power? How do you take other strategies, right? So strategy, I think, is key for any disruptor. And the only way you know that is when you know the context, you know how power works, and then you figure out how to speak to it. Sometimes we have to go big. Sometimes we have to make the demands, right? And that's fine too. But that's the strategy that we have to have in mind as we figure it out. The other is to find allies and support systems. You know, are there other people who can send similar messages but differently to people in power? So looking to find other people. I think that, you know, disruptors don't need to be in the situation of constantly creating conflict. And that go back to, again, John Lewis, good trouble, right? You know, power does sometimes need to shift and change, but also thinking about how we transform it rather than just, you know, completely dismantle it and burn it all down, right? Is there a middle way? Sometimes there is and sometimes there isn't, but that's where the strategic thinking helps quite a bit. And then in terms of how do we find others who are helping us. So your healers and caregivers might not be in your immediate ecosystem, but you can bring them in to support you. So oftentimes, you know, when I for example, was doing the work after 9/11, there weren't healers and caregivers in that ecosystem where I was doing the work. We were all either disruptors, or we were experimenters, or we were storytellers, right? But what I did was I tried to find people outside of that ecosystem to support me. So a coach, a healer who is a somatic healer or a therapist, someone who is thinking about community care and can create circles, right? Where you're going into a circle where you're speaking about what's going on with you, but you're not everyone else in the circle is doing the same thing. And that's okay too. So if you don't have them in your immediate ecosystem, it's absolutely possible to seek people out that you can then bring into your system of your circle of support.
Great. Thanks, Deepa. We're almost we're past 12:30, so I just want to, give people information for the next Instagram Live. And someone asked about if there's a survey to figure out your role. And I think what we're hoping comes out of this series is that people can see themselves more in each of the roles. So we're going to share some more materials after this IG Live. So some of the strengths, growth areas, who they work well with, reflection questions for disruptors. And then next month, we'll do it again with guides. So we'll do another IG Live and we'll do another packet.
And I love these comments that folks are putting in, because you're so right around, where you can look for healing justice lists. There's writing that's out there, right? So these are all ways. Sometimes for us to find caregivers and healers, we do need to do our own work. That's very true. But we will share out the material. I am looking into doing an assessment for folks as well. And also we do trainings for organizations, particularly who are engaged in social change on this ecosystem framework. So if you need any of that assistance or help, just please reach out to us over our website.
Right. So it's www.buildingmovement.org. And some people ask, yes, we will be saving this. The follow-up materials will be in the form of our next IG post. And we'll share the date closer to the next IG Live. It's going to be a month from today, probably.
All right. Well, thanks so much, everyone. This has been great. And if you like this, I'm happy to do more of these. So just reach out and let us know, and we'll see you in March. Take good care.
Yay. Thanks, Deepa.
Bye.
Bye.